In the same broadcast, he announced that the Supreme Commander for the new front in Western Europe would be an American, General Eisenhower.
The Russian army will continue its stern offensive on Germany's eastern front. The Allied armies in Italy and Africa will bring relentless pressure on Germany from the south. And now the encirclement will be complete as great American and British forces attack from other points of the compass. The commander selected to lead the combined attack from these other points is General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Tehran marked the end of Britain's status as a great power. Most visibly, what tipped the scales in America's favor was her inexhaustible supply of manpower. Britain, by 1943, had virtually no reserves. Men in their 40s were being conscripted into the army. While Britain was exhausting its resources, America and Russia were turning themselves into economic superpowers. Richard Overy.
One of the big untold stories of the Second World War is, in fact, how the United States transformed predominantly civilian free market economy in 1941 into a massive war economy in just a year by mobilizing that free enterprise culture, saying to businessmen, this is what we want, go out and produce it.
But if there was an American economic miracle, there was also a Soviet one, wasn't there?
The Soviet economic miracle was also remarkable, and it came at almost exactly the same stage as the American one. In 1941, they lost two-thirds almost of their productive capacity, large part of their grain-producing area, millions of workers. Yet they withdrew many of those workers, took some of the machinery and equipment back with them. They engaged in a whole lot of emergency planning, improvised production, and they focused absolutely everything on the mass production of half a dozen well-proven, high-quality weapons, and they just pumped them out.
Germany's economy was less successful. In transport, for example, the German army was decades behind the times, to the astonishment of Allied troops in Normandy in 1944. While we had thousands of jeeps and trucks, the Wehrmacht was relying on hundreds of horse-drawn carts. Moving in slow procession, they took terrible punishment from the air. One of the unforgettable sights of that campaign is of those Normandy roads clogged with the swollen, decomposing bodies of horses.
One of the paradoxes about Germany's war effort, of course, is that Germany produced some of the finest and most advanced technology in the world, but they squandered that advantage by encouraging an extraordinary amount of technical diversity, far too many projects, far too many little institutions and drawing offices. Hitler kept banging his head against the wall in 1941 onwards and saying, please, simplify your models and produce large quantities of them. But the army and the air force and the scientists they colluded with were just obsessed with technical modernity, with pushing this threshold forward. And the tension that produced in the end was that Germany was, by 1944, relatively underarmed, and you had a huge number of advanced projects which were going nowhere.
By D-Day in June, Allied fighters and bombers had effectively destroyed the Luftwaffe. This not only set things up for D-Day, it prevented German aircraft from spotting the huge build-up in the south of England. In Dover, the British had been watching Germans across the Channel ever since Dunkirk, but now the Germans were blind. Wynne Wakefield had worked in Dover's secret tunnels all through the war, monitoring shipping and watching enemy movements only 21 miles to the southeast. Could you see the French coast?
Oh, on a nice day you could almost see what they were smoking.
Now there you were sitting in the middle of this cliff, looking out from the cliff, quite high up, looking over at the enemy's coastline. Were you able to tell friends in the town, people you met? Because virtually you had the best view of the enemy of anybody in Britain.
We never said anything.
We never boasted about it?
We never told anybody what we were doing. No.
The actual destination of the invasion force was one of the best-kept secrets of the war. To deceive the enemy into expecting an invasion in the Calais region, British intelligence launched Operation Fortitude, a complex mixture of electronic trickery and misinformation designed to make the Germans think an invasion force was massing in the southeast corner of England and about to take the shortest route across the Channel. In fact, the force was concentrated many miles to the west, opposite Normandy. Dummy gliders were parked on airfields in southeast England and dummy landing craft in harbours.
We did see a lot of landing craft in the harbour. But they weren't landing craft, they just built them like that to make it look like it.
Could you tell, seeing them, that they weren't real landing craft?
No.
You thought they were landing
Oh
craft?
no, we thought they were
Even
landing
to you
craft.
they looked like landing craft, not
Yeah.
just bits of canvas and wood.
No,
and everything
no.
else.
No, they looked like the real thing.
The Allied commanders had hoped that the deception plan would work for a few days. In the event, it confused the Germans for weeks. Hitler kept thousands of troops in the Calais area, waiting for a landing that never came. Max Hastings.
It is ironic that whereas the German army was the outstanding fighting force of the Second World War, that whereas the Germans were incredibly good soldiers who, right to the bitter end, continued to outperform their enemies man for man at almost every level. One of their huge weaknesses was intelligence. All the way through the war, German intelligence was rotten. They were incredibly bad at finding out what their enemies were up to, and even worse at interpreting it and deciding what to do with it.
There was one potential intelligence breakthrough which the Germans failed to exploit. A coded message from London to the French resistance. Richard Aubry.
A resistance worker in France was tortured by the Gestapo and finally revealed that the BBC had planned to broadcast lines from a poem, French poem, at the beginning of the month when the invasion was going to happen, and then just shortly before the invasion was going to happen, the couplet would be completed, and some intelligence sergeant listened very carefully to what BBC was saying. He heard the first lines, and then he heard the second lines and got very excited. Rang up intelligence headquarters, rang up the army, and the army's response was that no serious power would broadcast their intentions to invade over the radio, and he was disregarded.
For better or for worse, the invasion was already underway. The pessimists were holding their breath. The British Chief of Staff, General Alan Brooke, wrote in his diary that he was very uneasy about D-Day. It may well be the most ghastly disaster of the whole war. I wish to God it was safely over, he said. Others simply wanted to get on with it. Among them, veterans of Dunkirk, like Royal Engineer George Ristel, Peter Martin, now a major, and General Montgomery, who'd led a division in France in 1940 and was now the field commander of all Allied troops for the opening phase of the campaign.
A very great deal depends on the success of our operation. If we do our stuff properly and no mistakes are made, then I believe that Germany will be out of the war this year.
At Dunkirk, I was a very, very raw second lieutenant. I didn't know my job. I was whipped behind the ears, and in 4 years I had grown up. And I was now a company commander and completely confident.
We are a great team of allies, British and American. There must be throughout this team a friendly spirit. We must have confidence in each other. As a British general, I regard it as an honor to serve under American command. General Eisenhower is captain of the team, and I am proud to serve under him. And I regard it as a great honor to have American troops serving under my command.
We marched off, down, ready to embark. And during the exercises we'd done in the past, we had been seen by the people of Southampton, who had always been free with ribald comments about "don't get your feet wet, lads," and that sort of thing. And on this occasion, they were absolutely, totally silent. They knew, I think, that this was it.
So then eventually he pulled out, and we stayed out in midstream, as I like to call it, and anchored. And old Spike left, and he had sealed orders. And he opened his up, and he got me and another couple of sergeants together. He said, "We're going into a place called Sword Beach, near Weeston." I said, "Well, is this the day?" "Yes," he said.
To get from Dunkirk to D-Day had taken the British 4 years. For the whole country, servicemen and civilians alike, it had been a hard and sometimes dispiriting slog. Too many setbacks, not enough victories, too many thousands killed in those intervening years. Now was the time for Montgomery and his men to make up for all that, to stake almost everything on one decisive battle, the biggest amphibious operation of all time.
I myself am prepared to put everything in and to take every legitimate risk. We must all do the same. Good luck to each one of you, and good hunting on the mainland of Europe.
From Dunkirk to D-Day was presented by Charles Wheeler, and the producer was Chris Bowlby. As part of